So we've got the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. You guys might not have known that the Federal Reserve is only about 100 years old. So we didn't have a central bank acting the way it does today, and the way it does today until after the Great Depression, really. But the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 came about to add some security to the banking system. So its original intent originally meant to be the banker's bank. The banker's bank. And so let's have all the bankers, if you're going to run a bank in the United States, you have to keep a deposit on reserves with the central bank. And if we collect enough deposits from everybody in the banking system around the nation, then when a rumor starts that a particular bank is going under, we can use those funds to make that bank liquid and provide all of the people who want to withdraw their money out of the bank with the funds they need to do so. And that took away that pressure that they were going to go under, that they needed to pull their money out. So we created what's known as a fractional banking system with required reserves. So originally meant to be the bank, banker's bank, we have what's called a fractional reserve system. A fractional reserve system. Each bank keeps a fraction of its total deposits on deposit with the central bank. This is the way countries, modern countries, do it throughout the world now. If you've got any of the major industrial countries, likely have their own central bank. With the European Union and those countries working together, things changed a bit there for those countries, but this concept is still the same. So the central bank for the United States is the Federal Reserve, otherwise affectionately known as the Fed. So when we refer to the Fed in this chapter, we're talking about the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank for the United States of America, the Fed. These reserves, these fraction of total deposit, is called required reserves. Required reserves. So I'll use the notation RR, capital R, required reserves. That is the amount of funds that they have to keep on hold with the bank, with the Fed.
That way if someone comes, so they have a set amount available, so if someone comes in and asks for a withdrawal, they're not like, well, we don't have your money right now.
Right. So the amount that they're required to hold back, A, should be enough to kind of handle the normal transactions for the day, right? So they have enough vault cash on hand so that if any one of their depositors on an average day walks into the bank and says, I want my money, they go to the bank vault, they pull it out, they whip out the hundreds, and they service that person's withdrawal, right? So that is part of the required reserves. So one part of the required reserves is vault cash. Vault cash counts for the bank as part of the legal minimum that they must hold back if they're going to run a bank in the United States. So vault cash is there, and this is daily transactions. Again, there's not enough there to handle everybody if they're all walking in at one time. If there does start to be a rumor going on, then the Federal Reserve will arrive with their big trucks and darked out vans and whatever else, and they will start funneling cash into the bank to meet everybody's demands for their transaction if needed. So that has basically taken away bank runs. Not completely though. There's been a few, even in, during this financial crisis time, with some bank failures that were going on. There were a few runs on the bank where the Fed did have to step up and help fund withdrawals. Okay, bear in mind too that old man Jimmy Stewart, what is he, George in that? Is that right? So George, he had an incentive to be able to handle daily transactions too, right? So he was doing this without the government putting in the regulation of the required reserves, because he was running a business and he needed to be able to do that anyway. So it's really on these bank runs where there might be an abnormal amount. So they always carried vault cash, is my point, to some degree. All right, so vault cash is one element. And then the other one is actual deposits with the Fed. Where they are actually having an account with their money, just like we bank at our bank, it's the banker's bank. So those two things make up the bank's required reserves. So one of the tools of the Fed is to set the required reserve ratio. So a tool of the Fed, a policy tool, maybe we should put in there just to be specific here. A policy tool of the Fed is the setting of the required, little r here, required reserve ratio. The RRR, all little baby r's. The required reserve ratio is that fraction. So for example, if the required reserve ratio is 0.20 and a bank has $100 million in deposits, by law, they always have to have how much in the form of vault cash or deposits with the Fed? 20 million, right? So 0.2, you can think about this as being 20%. It's technically the reserve ratio, so we express it as the point, but you might want to just think to yourself, okay, it's 20%. 20% of the money has to be held back. So RR, big RR now, this particular bank with $100 million worth of deposits has to have required reserves of 20 million bucks. All right. Questions so far? Piece of cake? We're going to get a little messier now. We're starting to slowly build up here. the excess money that they have after deposit, after they've accounted for what's required to be held back, that excess can be loaned out. So it creates what we call excess reserves. So total reserves equals excess reserves plus required reserves. All right, so to confuse things a little bit more for you, let's put a little note here. On a given day, a bank calculates its actual reserves. Actual reserves. How much they have on hand is vault cash and deposits at the Fed. Vault cash plus deposits at the Fed. So this is the lingo. Well, how much reserves do we have on hand today? Should we make this loan to this guy who wants to put up an apartment building or not? Well, let me see. How much vault cash do we have? How much deposits at the Fed do we have today? On a daily basis, that fluctuates, right? Somebody might have just walked in the door earlier and made a deposit of $200,000 at their bank. So this is going up and down all the time. They have to kind of look at maybe a board meeting and they look at what is their actual reserves. And so their excess reserves now, from thinking about it this way, their excess reserves equals their actual reserves minus what the government requires of them. Excess reserves can be loaned out. So today, this is the amount that can be loaned out. So excess reserves can be loaned out. Make sure you're writing all of this down because there'll be some homework problems that will have these little definitions and you'll need to know the difference. And I'm not even done yet. So excess reserves can be loaned out. That's the good part. Are banks forced to loan out all excess reserves? No. Forced would be the wrong word, right? So they're able to loan them out. That's like the theoretical maximum that they could loan out. But a particular bank might have some strategies in mind, long-term, short-term. The bank presidents, the vice presidents have looked and they decided that they want to keep their reserves at some desired level that's higher than the minimum level that the government said they had to keep it at. That creates desired reserves. This is the amount of reserves that a bank desires to hold. Note, desired reserves must be greater than or equal to required reserves. Government says you have to have at least this. They say, I'd rather hold 25% because we got some other things going on. That's fine. All right. How many people have had enough reserves for today? Might need some other stuff here to think about. All right, so that's our banking system. Any questions on the fractional part? You understand at least a little bit of the details that the government imposes regulations. You got the banking industry still having flexibility to do some stuff as they think about how much loans to do.
What's the actual reserve in comparison to total?
They're very close. What I was trying to emphasize is that on a given day, their actual reserves, what they have on hand for that day's decision, would be to be able to be loaned out. To define the excess reserves as actual minus required. Okay?
So,
Yep.
is it deposits at Fed of that day, or is it total?
That day, yeah, as a fraction of deposits, they're required by law. So this could total reserves is like total deposits too. That's the total amount of funds on hand at the bank. If we look at all the people that are there, we've got a required amount back, and then there's this additional component. Okay.
Is an ER just basically bulk cash then?
The excess, they could have it in other forms. It doesn't have to be bulk cash. So there's other ways that they can hold some of their funds on deposit with the Fed. So it could be bulk cash or deposits at the Fed. So it's not always just excess. In other words, they can hold more with the Fed than the minimum.
Right.
So it could be a combination. And then they have to shuffle around to make that loan go out. All right, let me go through a little example here that's a little more fun to think about. Imagine that you've got a little project in your backyard. And you're digging around because you're going to pour a new patio. And you stick the spade shovel in and it's not going down. And you're like, what the heck is that? You dig it up and there's a little box. Inside the box is $10,000. So, suppose you find a box buried in your backyard. And with $10,000 currency inside. Woohoo! Just go straight down.
Rock side.
All right. What do you do with the money? What do you do with the money? So, what's on your property is yours. Run to the store right away. Tuck it in a mattress. Let's see. What are you doing, Lewis? What are you doing with your money? Just curious. If you had that situation, I want to know what's the first thing that comes to mind for you of whether it's a purchase or an action or what. What are you thinking right now? Car. All right. So we're heading the car direction. Let's see, Kurt. Put in the bank. And what are you thinking about doing with it after that? What would be your target here of some down the road spending or whatever? Like just for emergency?
Yeah.
Baloney. That's too big for an emergency fund anyway. Why are you saving it?
Substantial emergency.
I can handle emergency fund, by the way, but it's actually a little bit large for good sound money management. That's probably a little bit large at this point in your life for an emergency fund. So let's have a little bit of fun with it. You don't have to spend it all, by the way, but spend a little bit for me, Kurt. What do you think? What do you want to spend it on? No computer, maybe a stereo, laptop, nice laptop, bank. So maybe some bank and some laptop. All right. All right, so none of you did the correct answer, I noticed, which was to report it to the authorities, right? Isn't that what we do first?
The government's like, zero.
What if it was intended to review? It was part of God's plan that you found it, that type of thing? Well, okay, so let's say you report it to the authorities and then you come back and 30 days later they had some sort of statutory hold, they couldn't find the rightful owner, bam, we're right back to you. So we only had to defer things about 30 days here and we're right back in. All right, so, let's see, let's just take, let's see, who'd we find here? Give me a number between 5 and 13. 7. Brandon. All right. I just needed a name, actually. I'm not even going to. Well, other than I'm going to ask you where your bank is. What bank are you at? Patriots Bank. All right. So Brandon deposits the $10,000 at Patriots, plural, Patriots?
Yep.
Patriots Bank. All right, and we've already kind of talked about what's going to go on here, right? The bank's in the loaning business. They like to loan stuff out. So lo and behold, Lewis comes into Patriots Bank. Lewis comes to, I'll just call it Pat Bank, for a car loan. How much of that $10,000 can Patriots Bank afford to do if the required reserve ratio is 0.2? If we kind of just try to imagine tracking these funds through the banking system here. What do they have to offer Lewis? What did he qualify for? How big of a loan? $8,000, right? So Lewis comes in to Patriot Bank for a car loan of $8,000. Yep, 1 minus. So they can loan out 80% of it. And Lewis, where are you doing your car shopping at? Give me, how about a car, where do you got a car dealer at hometown that comes to mind, or what's the name of your dealer that you're going to go run to? Right now. You are successful because you found $10,000 in your backyard. Little caddy, okay. And so where are you going to buy it at, though? What's the name of the car dealer that you're going to go to? What's that? Tustin? T-U-S-T-O-N? Okay. So Lewis goes to Tustin Caddy and buys the car. Just so happened they had a special. They were asking $9,000, but he managed to talk them down to $8,000. Now, what does Tustin $8,000? What does Tustin Caddy do with the $8,000?
Employees, a new car.
Okay. they go deposit it at a bank, right? Ultimately, but yeah, they need to pay their expenses and all of that stuff later. But right now, I want to kind of start to track the funds through the banking system. So they make deposit at Kurt. Where are you going for your bank? What's that? No, not the laptop, for the bank. What bank are you going to put your funds at? Grace? Great Southern, got it. So make deposit. Now we're talking about Tustin Caddy, happens to be a customer of Great Southern. So they're going to make deposit at Great Southern. Kurt comes in to Great Southern to get a loan for computer, and I'm embellishing a little here for you, some other gaming equipment. Of how much is Great Southern able to do pretty instantly since Tustin came in? 6,000, right? So they goes to Tustin Caddy to buy the car. Tustin makes the deposit of, how much is it again? 8,000 is Tustin's deposit, which now allows Kurt to get with a loan of 6. So how much do we got here that Great Southern is required to hold back? 16. 64, not 1,000, but 100, right? 6,400. So Kurt comes in to get a loan of 6,400 for his computer and gaming equipment. And it just so happens Great Southern is happy to do that since they got the deposit from Tustin Caddy earlier that day. All right, so Kurt, you're buying it at the Mac store, you said? All right, so Kurt takes funds. Kurt buys stuff at the Apple store. Apple store makes deposit at Wells Fargo of $6,400. All right, I will stop the chain there. I want to summarize it in a table form here a little bit better. So that we can think about what's going on in the economy with all these transactions and whatnot. So, summary. We started off this mess with a deposit of how much?
10,000.
10,000. So we had a $10,000 deposit from Brandon into Patriots. Patriots had required reserves of 20%. So they had 2,000 that they had to hold back, giving them excess reserves of 8,000. The 8,000 went to who? Who got that 8 in their hand? Who took out the loan? The big guy back there, Lewis. And he went to Tustin Caddy and made a deposit of 8,000. Great Southern had to hold back 1,600 of those funds, leaving 6,400 for Kurt to come walking into the bank, borrow, take it to Apple, and for Apple to dump it into their account at Wells Fargo. All right, so that process would continue on again here. Let's see, we got $1,280, and then that leads on, and so on, and so on, and so on.
So you have a whole bunch of them.
So, was the 10,000 in the shoebox a part of the money supply for the United States when it was buried in the backyard? What does it take to be considered to be a part of the money supply? So go back to that M1. Currency out in public. Now, whether it's hidden in the backyard or not, we don't know. This is an accounting function. All we know is it's not in a bank vault. So it is out in circulation. So that 10,000 is in the money supply. How much did the money supply change by when Brandon deposited it at Patriots Bank and put it into his checking account? How much did M1 change by from that initial deposit? So M1 equals currency in circulation plus checking account deposits. Did that initial change do anything to the money supply as the government measures it for economic activity? No. Right? We took 10,000, we moved it from here to here. But did the money supply change? Did the supply of money change in the United States? Let me put it to you differently. Does Brandon have access to his 10,000 at any given point in time he wants? Can he walk into the bank and get his 10,000? Does Brandon have access to his money that he put in Patriots Bank at any given point in time? Yeah, he can go walk in. I'm talking about our real life system now. If this was the scenario we just walked through, Brandon can go into the bank and get his 10,000 at any given point in time. Can Tustin Caddy walk into Great Southern at any given point in time and get their 8,000 if they chose to? Yes. Can Apple go into Wells Fargo and at any given point in time take their 6,400 out of their account? Yes. So how much did the money supply go up by from just those 1, 2, 3 rounds? How much did it go up by? Be careful. By just these 3 events, these 3 actions, how much did the money supply go up by? 22.4, no. Be careful. How much did the money supply go up by from these 3 actions? There's the first maneuver. Did it go up? No. So how much did the money supply go up by from these 3 maneuvers? 14.4, right? Brandon's got access anytime. Tustin Caddy's got access anytime. Apple's got access anytime. Truly, the money supply, the ability to do a transaction, went up by 8 plus 64. But it doesn't stop there. So on, and so on, and so on. And so the banking system creates its own money money is created through the system we have in place, the system of being able to loan out people's deposits. The fractional reserve system creates money. All right, we'll pick up there on Wednesday.